Hello and welcome to 3D modeling video number 68 and the 10th video on normal maps. So in this video I want to talk about optimization, how we can optimize our triangle count, how we can optimize our UV layout, and make sure you understand the relationship between smoothing groups and normal maps. So first of all, it's a good idea to keep your high polygon and low polygon objects on separate layers. Just select your objects, create a new layer, select the layer, and you can press this plus button, or if you have objects selected and you create a new layer, they would automatically go to that layer. So for example, let's say I want to create a layer to have all this floating geometry. So I would select all the floating geometry. Okay, make sure I have it selected. I'm just going to move things out of the way here and make sure everything follows. Alright, now when I create a new layer, you can see all the objects that I have selected automatically are added to this layer. So then I can go ahead and hide this. And the checkbox can go back to the layer that I want to work on. So low, for example. So anyways, it's a good idea to keep things organized, that we can quickly hide the low polygon layer or hide the high polygon layer and just work with the low polygon. So basically I'm going to go ahead and work with the low polygon for now. Okay. So let's go ahead and take a look at the UV layout here. So first of all, let's take a look at text tools. It's a tool I already showed you. I already showed you where you can find it, but in case you missed that, there will be a link in the description. To install it, just drag the MZP file into your 3ds Max viewport and it'll ask you to install it. So we're just going to click on Edit UV to open up our editor. So basically, the way that I have set up the UVs here is so that every time there's a shift, every time there's a drastic shift in terms of the sharpness of the angles, I have put that on a separate UV island, or UV shell as it's officially known. So this part right here is a separate UV shell right here. This part right here is a separate UV shell, and you can see that this part right here, separate UV shell. This is all one shell because there's no drastic changes in terms of its angle. You can see it's just pretty much, there are some changes in angles here, but it's not very sharp. Here, for example, this is all one piece. And then there's a sharp change of angles going from here to here, going from here to here. So that's why, and the reason you want to do this is this allows the object to look a lot better, and it allows the normal maps to be a lot better as well. If you don't use this method, you'll get a lot of strange shadowing and shading in your object. So anytime there's a big change in angles, you want to go ahead and give it a separate UV shell. It's pretty simple. And if you do that, there's an easy way that you can create smoothing groups. Basically, using text tools, go into Tools, Smoothing Groups from UV Shells. So first of all, let's take a look at the object right now. You can see it does not have smoothing groups. You can see because the faces are faceted. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Tools, Smoothing Groups from UV Shells. And it has now applied smoothing groups to each separate UV shell, each separate UV island. So now we've got a perfect smoothing situation. However, let's say that I apply just one smoothing group. So right now they have 3 different smoothing groups, but they are applied intelligently so that they don't overlap. So let's say I just clear all and just apply one smoothing group. Notice how it doesn't look very good. This is what happens when you try to have too few smoothing groups. You get this really bad shading happening here. And that's all because it's trying to smooth all this together. Now, having a smoothing group of 1, having just one smoothing group, regardless of whether it's 1 or 4 or 32, that's all the same. Having one smoothing group is bad for hard surface objects. It's bad for low polygon objects. However, if you have a low polygon organic object, like an eye or like a very large creature, then actually having a smoothing group of 1 may be what you want. Because remember, that is a organic creature with lots of smooth surfaces. In this case, however, we have some sharp, hard surfaces. So we need to go ahead and have this kind of smoothing group set up. And Text Tools gives you an easy way to do that, easy way to create your shells, and easy way to quickly create a smoothing group for it. Okay, so optimization. You'll notice that there's no left side or right side to this object. That's because we will be mirroring it. In other words, whatever texture we have on this side will be mirrored on the other side. And that's just a simple process of applying a symmetry modifier. If you do that, you will have mirrored UVs and geometry. So here's the thing. If you want to have mirrored geometry, mirrored textures, you want to have this line in the middle. If you don't want mirrored textures, you'll have to go ahead and optimize this mesh further by getting rid of this. Simply by using, for example, the weld tool and welding things off to the side here. Because if you want all of this to have its own unique textures, then you'll want to optimize the mesh and reduce these edges in the middle because they no longer serve a purpose. And this one as well. So you want to remove these edges in the middle because they serve no purpose. If you just want to have the same UV space, if you want this all to have a unique UV layout. However, if you want to optimize things, what you want to do is you want to set up your UVs first. Set up your UVs, make sure everything's correct, and then once you set up your UVs, then you want to apply symmetry. Okay, so in this part we have a tube going around here. And however, the part in the middle will not be seen. The part inside. So we might as well just optimize it. Optimization is the process of removing unnecessary texture space and geometry and other things, particle effects and anything else that might be in the game engine, removing it so that the game will run better. More frames, less lag, and this is the process of optimization. Of course, you can always optimize this further. If you want it to be really low poly, you can just remove this pipe altogether and have a different type of geometry here. Anyways, you can see now that there is no geometry here in the middle. However, you should think about what this object's purpose will be and whether it will be animated or not. Because if this object will be animated, let's say it's a lever that will be pulled, then you can't really get away with that, because there will just be a big hole here. So it all depends on what the object's purpose will be. If this is a static object, then you can remove the geometry inside. The same for this. It might also be possible to remove the geometry down here. And because we're working with modifiers, we can just undo that process really quickly. So let's say we optimize it, but we decide later on that we actually want it to, we want the core to be able to be taken out, for example, to like pop out. Then we actually want geometry to be there. So why would we want to save on texture space? Well, if we look at this, we can see that so right now this object, this geometry is taking up this much texture space. which we can always optimize it further. We can make our most important parts take up a larger space, which basically means we'll be able to have a larger text resolution for them. The larger a UV shell is, the more pixels you can fit into it. See, if it's very small, you can only fit so many pixels in there, which means that it's going to be very blurry when you see it. And if you enlarge it, it's going to be able to fit a lot more pixels. So to demonstrate, I went ahead and created a quick material with a simple, this kind of green metal texture. So you notice that if I shrink it down to this much, notice how blurry it gets. See how blurry it is? That's because it only has access to a small amount of pixels here. However, so notice the blurriness. However, if I go ahead and enlarge it, it now has access to a lot higher text resolution. We can see it's a lot more detailed now, a lot better looking, because it has access to all of this space now. So this is why I want to go ahead and create a mirrored texture. So if this object was not mirrored, if this object was actually whole, let's say that I go ahead and apply symmetry and unwrap it again. That means that this object now needs to take up two of these huge pieces, which means that the good side is that we'll be able to get a unique texture for it. However, the bad side is it's going to take up a lot of space that other pieces won't be able to use. Other UV islands, other UV shells will not be able to use, which means we might have to actually take it and scale it down, which means that it's going to hurt the amount of resolution it has access to. So to increase the amount of resolution it has, what we do is we don't give it unique space. We unwrap it in half. So that way it can have a much larger amount of texture that's taken up, because there's just only one of it, only one island here. And then once we have baked our maps, or then we can apply symmetry, bake our maps, and now both of these sides will be taking up the same space here. So if I go to select overlapped faces, 3ds Max will tell me these faces are all overlapped. However, in this case it's fine because we're just mirroring the texture, the object, left and right. So in this case, having overlapped textures is fine. So it really depends on whether your object needs unique texture spaces, textures on both sides, or if you can get away with optimizing it and having a mirrored texture. You can have mirrored diffuse texture, mirrored normal map texture as well. So that allows us to save a lot of space. So anyways, before you get ready to project it, bake your normal maps, you can go ahead and symmetrify it. In this case though, I don't really need to because the object isn't really connected in the middle. Alright, I'll go ahead and get my regular blue material. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and quickly bake some normal maps, and I'll get back to you once I finish. Okay, so before I actually bake it, I want to show you quickly how we can set up our projection modifier. So I've applied symmetry, I've applied projection. I'll go ahead into pick list, hide the hidden objects, and select all the visible objects. So now we need to go ahead and inflate our cage a little bit so we can capture all this high polygon geometry. What I'll do is I'll start with the push. I'll set it to 0.5, and 0.5 can capture all this detail, but it's not going to be able to capture this floating geometry. So what I'll do is I'll go into cage, go into my front viewport, and I will select these vertices here. Make sure I do not select the ones in the middle because there's no floating geometry in the middle. And I'm going to go ahead and lift it up until the cage covers the high polygon geometry. Like say right there. And I'll do the same for the top as well, because the top, there's some floating geometry on the top here as well. Just lift it up a little bit. Alright. And that's how you want to quickly adjust your cage. And now that we've done that, we are ready to begin baking. Alright, so I finished the baking process, and here I've taken a low polygon object and cloned it off to the side. So here is the low polygon object right here with the normal maps applied. So still got some things we need to fix here. Some parts of the bake need to be optimized a little bit. But this is a pretty decent bake for now. And it only came out this way because we used proper smoothing groups. So if we look at our smoothing groups, if we just give it all a smoothing group of 1, we're going to get this result, which looks pretty bad. So having the proper smoothing groups is very important before you begin baking. So anytime you have a sharp edge, you definitely want to give it different UV shells here. And that will give you a good result. And we've also got mirroring happening here, so this object is mirrored right down the middle. So all the geometry, all the texture that's on this half is being mirrored. So we're saving on a lot of texture space here. Otherwise, this left side would need to have unique texture space, and it would be taking up a lot of extra space that other objects cannot use. This way we've optimized our texture so that we are sharing the space, it's mirrored, and well, right now I just kind of moved it out of the way, but this is what the texture map, this is what the UV map will look like if each object had its own unique space. And it would be taking up space that other pieces can't use. But this way, it's all nice and mirrored. The only bad thing about mirroring is that the player can see that it's simply mirrored, and that can kind of break the suspension of disbelief, sort of. It can kind of take you out of the game world when you realize that the object you're looking at is just mirrored. It kind of makes things look artificial. However, in some cases it can make the game run a lot better, and you can mask it in various ways. You know, with a weapon, for example, if a player has a right-handed weapon, they're usually looking at the left side of the weapon, so they won't really notice if the right side has mirrored textures. So if you're looking at this object, from this side, you're not really going to notice that the left side has the same exact textures as on the right side, or vice versa. So not all parts of your mesh have to be mirrored. For example, if you look at my low polygon mesh, the middle part, it does not have to be mirrored. It can have its own unique textures on the right side and on the left side. And this piece in the front also can have its own unique textures. But the pipes can be mirrored, and the main part can be mirrored, because on the main part there's a nice little part in the middle that's blocking our view of this side. When we're creating our texture, we want to make sure that we use the right technique so that it's not too obvious that it's mirrored. If we create a really obvious detail here, it will be very obvious that it's mirrored. So we want to kind of create scratches and dirt in such a way that it's not obvious that it's mirrored. So thank you for watching, and take care.